are excited to have you join us for the Come Follow Me 2021 podcast and study of the Doctrine and Covenants, hosted by Rod Meldrum and Jonathan Neville, and presented by Gospel Doctrine Answers. In today's podcast, we will study Doctrine and Covenants 37 through 40. If ye are not one, ye are not mine.
Welcome, everybody, to our podcast. We are so grateful to have you being a part of us. This has been a kind of a hectic couple of weeks because we've had our big conference that we've been doing. And so hopefully this came out a little bit later than before. We are getting our podcast back together. And I have with me today a special guest. Now, this is Dason Mauser. And he's from Colesville, Idaho. I was just teasing him before we started the podcast. I said, so are you a Gen Xer or are you a millennial? And I don't know. so tell us just a little bit about yourself, Dason.
Okay. Well, I'm 19 years old. I'm currently living here in Colesville, Idaho. I was born in Rexburg in 2002, and lived there for about a year. My mom and dad both went to BYU. My mom graduated from Ricks before it changed to BYU Idaho, and then my dad graduated from BYU Idaho. So that's kind of funny. So so then we moved to South Carolina, lived there for 10 years, and then moved back here to Idaho for a year. But then we moved over to Connecticut for 1 year, and we've kind of lived everywhere. Then we moved down south to New Jersey for about 2 years, and now we're back here. We've been here for about 3.5 years, and I'm getting ready to go on my mission. So that's kind of me.
So tell us that. So just this morning you had something about your mission going on. What was that?
It was my mission physical. So I was getting that all taken care of, and all the just the standard physical stuff like that, eye vision, blah blah blah.
And you passed with flying colors.
Yep.
Awesome.
So I'm getting ready to go. So it's really exciting.
All right. So this is lesson number 16. This is Doctrine and Covenants sections 37 through 40. And actually, I had an individual who we're going to have a pretty deep dive discussion, but it turned out to not be a possibility in regard to being one. But Dason has had some pretty amazing experiences. So now I want to just remind everybody that this is from the lesson manual here, the Come Follow Me manual for this year, obviously, with the Doctrine and Covenants. And if in case this is your first time you've joined us, we don't go through all the lesson material like you would in a regular standard lesson. We try to pick a few things out and then kind of do some deep diving where we can talk about some particular subjects in the lesson. But we're not trying to cover the whole thing. There are a few things that we would like to cover, and today, one of those things is going to be having to do with faith and example, and we're going to use Lucy Mack Smith as an example of that. But Dason, I had maybe you could tell us a little bit about how we met from your perspective.
It was kind of funny. So it was a funny story, everybody. So it was it was last Christmas. It was the week before Christmas, I believe. Yeah. So I had called Rod, and I had been watching his podcasts or whatever, and I was really, really enjoying the Book of Mormon ones because Book of Mormon is my deal. So I was thinking one day after watching one of his podcasts, and I was just thinking, like, how does the flood tie in with modern science and all that? And then this thought came to my mind that said the Ice Age was the flood. And then I called Rod, left a message. A week later, he got back to me. We had a pretty good, interesting discussion. And then after, he sent me this for a Christmas present. I watched the entire thing in 2 days. So I'm just kind of really caught up in it. But yeah, I learned a lot from that. So I appreciate it. Stuff for that.
So the DNA and Dating Dinosaurs was kind of your first introduction to the universal model material.
Yeah.
So did you just find the podcast just by searching, or how did you know about the podcast?
Well, how I found the podcast is actually that I had been watching a lot of Wayne May's material, And I had also watched Ryan Fisher's Nephite Explorer. I
Yes.
watched that all. And I had been looking on your evidence site, Book of Mormon Evidence or .org, something,
Yeah.
and I saw that you were gonna last year. I saw that you guys were gonna do a Book of Mormon one, because I was like, "Ooh, this is gonna be nice," because it's with the Follow Me and everything. So I watched everything, watched every episode. Day one to the last final episode, and I've also been watching your the Doctrine and Covenants ones, and
Well,
it's a really nice way to kind of get a little more spirituality, go throughout the week and learn some new things as well.
wow, fantastic! Thank you so much for that. So a couple of quick things. I want to get into, so those of you who that are watching this, if you can turn to your Doctrine and Covenants in section 37, it's interesting because this in this particular case, now these are things that are happening. This is the very end of 1830 and the beginning of 1831 is when these things are kind of going on, and I'm going to share with you a couple of things that were going on there. But in section 37, it talks about that, he says, "Behold, I say unto you that it is expedient in me that you should translate anymore, not translate anymore until you go to the Ohio." I've always felt that was an interesting thing. Why did he say the Ohio instead of just Ohio? And it turns out that part of the reason is because of the fact that Ohio, although was a state and so forth, that the Ohio was still called that because of that valley being the Ohio River Valley. So a lot of times they would call it the Ohio because it's the Ohio River Valley. And so now the Saints know that Joseph Smith and Emma, they're up in Fayette, and they're now going to be going to the Ohio, which is down by what ultimately ended up becoming Kirtland. Anyway, so he's actually working, the translation he's working on is not the translation, obviously, of the Book of Mormon, because this is now out, but it's actually the inspired version of the Bible is what he was working on. And while he was working on the inspired version of the Bible, he was going through some of the creation things, and so you can see that this is affecting the revelations that he is having here in Fayette, New York, as he talks this is in section 38, and he starts off with this is verse 1. "Thus saith the Lord your God, even Jesus Christ, the great I am, Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the same which looked upon the wide expanse of eternity, and all the seraphic hosts of heaven before the world was made, the same which knoweth all things, and all things are present before mine eyes." I know that is something that has a lot of people talked about, and this is this issue of time. I'd love to get into this in more detail, because a lot of people have felt that there is no time with God, that God sees all things past, present, and future, which he can, but does time exist? And then people have said, well, there's scriptures that say that there's time no more, but yet here we have the Lord in several revelations in the Doctrine and Covenants. He talks about the time as it is understood here on this earth, that 1,000 years is as a day to him. And when we understand that God lives on a planet which is nigh unto Kolob, which we get from the end of the Doctrine and Covenants, actually the Pearl of Great Price, the planet upon which God dwells is so massive, it is so huge, it is a governing planet, that in the same amount of time that it takes for our Earth to make 1,000 revolutions around our sun, or in other words 1,000 years, that planet that God lives on will make one rotation on its axis, which is by definition a day. So a day to God is 1,000 years of our Earth time. And I know that sounds a little bit, people go, wow, that's, never really thought of it in that kind of sense. But if there was no time, would there be any progression? Because progression, in order for things to progress from one point to the next, to the next, to the next, there would have to be a timeline. And we know that there was a pre-existence, there's our existence, there's an after-existence, there is definitely time as far as that's concerned. The only question is how does God look at it? He says all things are present before his eyes. And part of the reason for that is because when you know all of the physical attributes of the world and the universe, and you know every physics, every law of nature that happens, you can predict with 100% accuracy what is going to happen in the future. Now, because God knows all things, then that means that he can predict what's going to happen in the future, but it doesn't mean that the future is happening, right at that time. He can see that in the future, just like a vision many times can be had of something that hasn't happened yet. So that's why I kind of think about that. Okay, I'm going to get back to you here in just a second, Dason. So he says, verse 3, I am the same which spake, and the world was made, and all things came by me. And I am the same which have taken the Zion of Enoch into my own bosom. And verily I say unto you, as many as have believed in my name, for I am Jesus Christ, and in my own name, by the virtue of the blood which I have spilt, have I pleaded before the Father for them. And I love that concept of a couple of concepts here. Number one is the city of Enoch. What was it about the city of Enoch, brothers and sisters, that caused it to be translated and taken into the Lord's bosom, basically, is how he says it here. So there's that aspect, and that actually there is something about this in this section of the Doctrine and Covenants. We're going to talk about if you're one, if you're not one, you're not mine. And the second concept here is he says, I pleaded before the Father with them. That's something that I have pondered a lot about in the last couple of years. I had a special blessing that I received about 2.5 years or so ago. And in the blessing, it was talked about that if all of us were, it applies to all of us, but basically it applied to me at the time, that after this life is over, when we stand before the judgment bar of God and we're talking to, or our life, story, I guess you might maybe say, our life history plays before us, so forth. And we see all the mistakes, and we just, I can see myself just hanging my head in shame before God and just going, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. Oh my word, I am so dumb. I can't believe I did this. But standing there right beside me would be Christ. And as I am ashamed of myself and some of the things I've done in my life, then Christ would be there, and he would literally plead before the Father for me and say, you know what, he made a couple mistakes, but I'll take those mistakes, put those on my account, and take them off of his account, and that Christ would plead before the Father for each of us. And I see that. I feel such a love, and it gives me a greater gratitude, to be honest with you, for Christ and what he has done for us, but what he will do for us in the future. In verse 7 it says, "Before I say unto you that mine eyes are upon you, I am in your midst, and ye cannot see me." Even though we can't see him, he is obviously with us. And he also talked about how the powers of darkness are upon the prevail over the earth, and we see that more and more as the wrapping up scene of the before his coming is before us now. And then in verse 18, this is where I wanted to bring Dason in here just a little bit. It says, "And I hold forth and deign to give you greater riches, even a land of promise." Now, where have we heard this land of promise thing before? Okay. Again, we have Christ, and when he's talking to the Nephites, he talks about two lands of promise, the two Jerusalems, Jerusalem and the New Jerusalem. Canaan and Canaan, the original land of promise by Adam, and then the Canaan of Abraham and Isaac. There's these two lands of promise, and now he says he's going to give them even a land of promise, a land flowing with milk and honey, upon which there shall be no curse when the Lord cometh. Let me ask you a question. Is the land of promise of the Book of Mormon the same land of promise that they are on, Joseph Smith and the early saints? Are they on the same lands when they're going to the Ohio? Is that the land of promise that they're talking about, or is it more of a land of promise? Because there's more than one possible level of understanding here. It could be the land of promise, meaning the physical real estate. And also it could be talking about more of an esoteric, as we progress and so forth, that the ultimate land of promise is to be in the celestial kingdom with the Lord. Yeah. And so this land of promise, he says, I will give it unto you for the land of your inheritance, if you seek it with all your hearts. And he says, and this shall be my covenant with you, yea, ye shall have it for the land of your inheritance, and for the inheritance of your children forever. while the earth shall stand, and ye shall possess it again in eternity, no more to pass away. So I think when God says forever, how long is forever with God? A very long time. Okay.
Yeah.
But this is interesting because here we have a revelation from the Lord that they're going to inherit this land of promise, and this is at the same time as they are moving to Ohio. And ultimately they're going to move to Missouri, right? This whole region here is the original land of promise of Abraham, or excuse me, not Abraham, of Adam. And then it's the land of promise of the Jaredites. It's the land of promise of the Nephites. It's the land of promise of America, essentially. And now the Lord is again stating that this North American area, this heartland of America, is the land of promise that we're talking about here. It says, and you shall possess it again, and it says, and verily I say unto you, in a time ye shall have no king or ruler, for I will be your king and watch over you. So, again, in the Book of Mormon, it talks about that it's good to have a king if you can always have a righteous king. Unfortunately, most men and women can't seem to keep it together when they have power and authority, so they have a tendency to exercise unrighteous dominion. And he says, so it's better if you can have a righteous king, but until Christ reigns again, there will be no really truly righteous king. So we're looking forward to that kingship, but until then, the Constitution of the United States is the best governance system that we have in the world, really. Okay, so this land of promise. Dason, I want you related to me an experience that you had a number of years ago. I believe you said you were 15 years old at the time, and it has something to do with this land of promise. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened, what was the circumstances leading up to it, and then what you saw?
Okay. So it was so I was watching the I was 15. I was watching the October General Conference, the Sunday session. It was right after the closing prayer, and I just had this thought. You should go and look for the Book of Mormon lands. This thought came into my mind that I should go look for it. And so that day, and I just started looking, and first thing I thought was well, let's look at Central America. Because all the young kids and all those big, massive temples, it's easy to relate to. And so I just started looking there and kind of looking in South America. Let's see if I can find it. But then over the next couple of days, I just started to realize there's not really a lot of consistencies. I started to realize, well, why would they say 2 Hill Cumorahs? If there's one in New York, then why would they say that's not the actual one? And that bugged me. And it bugged me for about a week. And so then I just finally decided to say a prayer, asking Heavenly Father essentially to help me to find the true Book of Mormon lands and understand where they were. So it was essentially at the end of my evening, at the end of my day. It was either Friday, Saturday, and I just went in and fell asleep. So as I was sleeping or whatever, and I just started dreaming that I was with my family at the Nauvoo, over at the Nauvoo in the Illinois Temple. It was a very interesting dream, and my family went off to go do something or whatever in the dream, and I just kind of went over, looked over at the Nauvoo Illinois Temple, and I looked over right across the river, and then I noticed something starting to happen. The sun rose in the west and then set in the east, and it just started to keep going quicker and quicker, and I was looking around what is happening, and I saw the seasons change, and it just going really, really, really quick, and it went on for 2 minutes, but it went faster and faster and faster and faster until I saw flashes of people I saw the old Nauvoo just kept going, and then I was I can't take this, so I closed my eyes, and then when I closed my eyes 10 seconds after that I opened them, and then I look across the river, and there is a city. So
this the impression was that you were kind of being taken back in time. Is that kind of the idea that?
I kind of figured that out when it was going really fast, and I was I must be somewhere, and I couldn't figure out where I was. I looked back towards the temple, there was nothing there. It was the hill. There's like woods behind me or whatever, and I look over across the river, and there's a city, and I could not figure out what city that was. I was very, very, very confused. So I kind of started walking down towards like the bank just to see if I get closer. And as I go up towards the bank, I'm seeing these ships, I'm seeing canoes with people, and I'm seeing these massive ships, like ships that looked like they had men on them, lots of people. And I noticed that their dress was very, very, very almost Middle Eastern, you'd say, but like almost like relaxed, like kind of I don't know how to compare it. It was kind of like, I don't know how you would look at the Heartland picture of Moroni translating the writing on the gold plates, kind of like that, but with different colors and very vibrant colors. So, and then I look over to my right, and there's a canoe sitting there. So, and it was empty. It was empty. I walked over and I looked around, and there was no one there. And then when I looked again, there was a canoe in it. There was a oar in it. And I was like, that wasn't there before. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go across the river. So I get in the river and I push off and I'm paddling over.
Now, one second. Let me interrupt you for a second. So have you ever been to Nauvoo before?
I have never been to Nauvoo.
So you've never seen that before?
I've never been there. I mean, I've seen pictures and all that, and I've been like, maybe that'd be an interesting place to go on my mission. I don't know. But yeah, so yeah. Uh-huh. So as I'm paddling across the river, I noticed that my clothes were not the same clothes I was in. It was similar to the clothes they were wearing. It was very, very, like very, very, very smooth fabric, almost like linen, like a linen shirt, and it was very, very long. And okay. I had like a sash to keep it up and whatever. And wow. I was wearing kind of like moccasins, you say, that were like knee high almost. And wow. As I was going across, and I had to avoid them. I watched all these ships go by, and they were talking, and I couldn't really understand the language. And I couldn't understand the languages first, but then as they started talking more, it seemed like the language changed into English, so I could understand it. So as I was going across the river, and I get to the other side, and I see this. The city's huge. I see these massive walls, and there's men on top of these towers. And now that I look back, I realize that they look like the Hopewell Mound Builder. Like they had this armor on, and they had this. It was just amazing to look at. I was just like, "What city is this?" I could not figure it out, and I was just compelled to keep walking into the city. And as I walked into the city, I saw there's just like almost like a trading area, like with a big market, and there's just people, women and children, little kids running around like chasing each other and all that. And I look over to my right, and there was even what seemed like a blacksmith. He was hammering out some kind of a sword or whatever, or something kind of metal weapon. And I keep walking, and I see this massive like earthen platform, like temple, it seemed like. So I walk over, and there's three men. There's three men. They were all talking amongst themselves, and they had this armor on or whatever, and they didn't have their head plates or whatever on. They had to take them off. I could see their hair, except for the largest man. He was very large, and he had the most elaborate armor, and I was like, that is the most interesting armor I've ever seen. I've never seen anything like that. So, and then as I got closer, he turned over and looked at me, and then he's motioned his friend, hang on a second, and he walked over to me and said, and called me and told me by my name, Dason, this is Zarahemla. And then the dream ended. And I was just in awestruck. And then I woke up a few minutes later, and I was just in awestruck. I was like, what did I just see? I could not understand. So, and so he did mention one last thing before the dream ended. He said, look for Zelf in the mountains. And I never heard that before. I'm like, who's that?
So you never heard of the name Zelf before?
I never heard.
At this point, you had never heard of the Heartland research before or anything?
I had never heard anything. So I wake up and I never heard any of it. And when I woke up, I was like, that was not coincidental. I had a privilege to see something. And so I literally just got up and I went onto YouTube and looked up Nephites in North America. And the first video I saw was Wayne May's presentation, and I watched the entire thing. I was just blown away. So and here I am today, just not having so much knowledge and understanding of things. I'm just blown away still. There's so much new stuff coming out. It's just amazing.
Wow, what an experience you had.
I know.
It's really kind of interesting that this is all before you even heard of the Heartland Research or Zelf or Wayne May or me or anybody.
Yeah. In my patriarchal blessing, it tells me to be humble. So I don't necessarily try to share this a lot. I mean, I've told a couple people and you, but I don't, honestly, telling that story makes me emotional because it's just like, I could not believe what I just saw.
Yeah. It's always difficult to know what kind of sacred things you should share. There are some things that are personal that has to do with your personal testimony. I thought that this was your story was really interesting and compelling as far as that's concerned, especially in light of what we're going to get to later on in the year, which is section 125 in the Doctrine and Covenants, where at section 125, verse 3, it says, "Let them build up a city unto my name upon the land opposite of the city of Nauvoo, and let the name of Zarahemla be named upon it." Have you ever remember reading that
I had never, I honestly, when I was younger, I had never really read Doctrine and Covenants, and I never really read the Book of Mormon fully. I had just, I had gone to Sunday school, I had gone and done that, and then after that and started researching, I have read the Book of Mormon over 30 times.
Well, that's a good thing.
I need to get it going, or it's just not.
Well, that is really interesting because I just love that there's this amazing correlation to a young 15-year-old man who has this dream, and the dream actually matches, to pretty much exactly. I mean, at least this being named Zarahemla across the river from Nauvoo. You had never been to Nauvoo, didn't know about this research, hadn't really read the section 125 in the Doctrine and Covenants, and yet here was this amazing dream that you had that ties all those things together. I just think that's absolutely not a coincidence, like you said.
Do you mind if I share one more thing? Just it's like a tiny little thing. So in my, it's kind of in my, along with my patriarchal blessing, it just tells me to be humble. There's one, it's just really, you need to be humble.
Yeah.
But then in it, this is the only thing I ever say, is that you will, by reading the Book of Mormon, you will have a love for the words of the Book of Mormon, and by them you shall obtain great knowledge.
Yeah.
And I had gotten my patriarchal blessing.
That's a promise.
Yeah, and I had got it. I had gotten it the month before, in August, and I did not realize it. And I'm like, okay, I'm probably just going to understand more spiritual things, and it just tied all together. So I don't know what happened there.
Well, that is quite an experience. Again, brothers and sisters, I mean, this is obviously a very sacred experience. And so I appreciate your being willing to kind of to share it. I think it's it's not necessarily doctrinal kind of thing, so I think we're okay in talking about that kind of thing. But I think it is really interesting that this is something that you had as a personal experience for yourself, and knew about this before you knew about any of the other research that's been done about it. So, Dason, thank you for sharing that. Okay, now feel free to jump in here anytime. We're just going to handle a couple other things here, everybody. So, one of these, this scripture in section 38 and verse 27. This verse is just really a powerful one. It says, "Behold, this I have given unto you as a parable, and it is even as I am. I say unto you, be one, and if ye are not one, ye are not mine." And throughout the Book of Mormon and other scriptures, that the Lord talks about how He and the Father are one, and He and the Father and the Holy Ghost are one. If they weren't one, that would be very problematic. Obviously, there wouldn't be a Godhead, so to speak. But as I have pondered this, and I have several friends. In fact, the friend that was going to be with me talking about this, it's been a fairly big thing with him as well, and that is that where, as members of the church, where are we not one? I think that as you go out and you look on the internet and things, there's lots of places where people are saying, you know what, I like what the prophet said here, but I don't really like what he said there. And they want to choose, which ones they want or don't want to acknowledge or agree with, or scriptures, the same kind of thing. There's a lot of division. And in fact, I think Satan really wants a lot of division within the church, and that's one of the reasons why. And just one of them is the geography of the Book of Mormon issue. That's a pretty big one for a lot of people. It's a big deal, and as I've told people before, I don't think anybody's going to be denied access to the celestial kingdom if they can't properly answer the question of where did the Book of Mormon take place, right?
Or do you believe in one or two Comoras?
yeah. Are you a one Comora guy or not? Okay. So I think that people will be allowed into the celestial kingdom from both camps. But nevertheless, truth is truth, and the more truth we can have in our lives, the more light we can get into our lives, the more Christ-like we can become. But this whole thing about Enoch, the seed of Enoch, what was it about them? They were of one heart and one mind. And as a church, I can see, at least members of the church, there's a lot of division, and it runs along many different lines, from human sexuality kind of thing, and the LGBTQ, and all these other different issues, to geography of the Book of Mormon, to even church history and what really is and isn't church history. Were there really miracles that happen in church history? And that's one of the last things I wanted to talk about here in this podcast is. We see in some books kind of the dumbing down of the miracles that happen. Say, well, okay, so that was in the early church history, but, it's probably better explained by this or this other thing happening or whatever.
And what goes along with that is the stone in the hat thing.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. That's another prime example.
I'm just like, you're intentionally taking something sacred and you're changing it just to fit what you think. Yeah. And that is not, and honestly, we need to keep it what God has told us and what the Lord has told us and what the prophets have told us. If we don't, and we keep using the thoughts of man and the opinions of men, we'll end up failing. How else do you think it's failed? Or in their church and such?
Well, exactly. And one of the things that you brought up was the universal model.
Yeah.
And so forth. That's another area where there's a lot of division in the church. That those who take the scriptures as a more literal account, and that this actually did happen in this way, and that Adam and Eve really were the first human beings on the earth, and that the earth is really only about 13,000 years old with the physical creation, and then since then we have about 6,000 years since then, since Adam and Eve. And those who believe that we literally, that science has it right, and that we came from lower life forms, we came from still lower life forms, and ultimately everything came from nothing, as we've discussed in the DNA and Dating Dinosaurs DVD.
Yeah, I remember your podcast. What it was from last week, or it was with Dave. What was his name? David. Yeah,
David Reed.
Yeah. And his research makes total perfect sense with the whole DNA and the dating. It makes perfect. They take the theoretical theory and just change it to tweak it. And I have a feeling that they do it on purpose, and it's one of the adversary's ways to kind of get us to doubt. Because, and after all, we're men. We're men. We don't know everything. And I have to remind people, like I told people, we don't know everything. science is a lot of guessing. There's a lot of truth behind it, but we do not know everything.
Well, it's kind of like with the whole COVID thing. First it was said that wearing a mask will have no effect because the virus is so small. It's like keeping a mosquito out of your house using a chain link fence. But then they change it again. Science changes all the time. It's interesting that we have now government officials who say, "Oh, well, we follow the science," but the science is saying two different things. Many times. In fact, science has been wrong an awful lot of times, and if you put your faith and trust in the science, then you're probably going to be wrong more often than you're right because it changes all the time. So back to this that last part here. So it predicts in verse 29 of Doctrine and Covenants 38 again. It says it predicts wars in far countries, and you say that there will soon be great wars in far countries, but ye know not the hearts of men in your own land. A lot of the different things that have happened to undermine the Constitution of the United States actually began to happen in this kind of time frame here, and then after the Civil War. In the end of verse 30, it says, "If ye are prepared, ye shall not fear." Which again, if you watched the podcast a couple of weeks ago and involved the long 4-hour presentations that I did with the Sisters of Liberty on the Last Days timeline. If you get a chance to see that, folks, that hopefully will help you to be more prepared so you shall not fear. There's a lot of people who are very scared about what's going on in the world out there today, and this will hopefully give you some encouragement. Let's see, then verse... I love in verse 32, it says that you shall be endowed with power from on high when you get to Kirtland. One of those things was probably the building of the temple, the Kirtland Temple, the first temple of this dispensation in the Ohio River Valley, which, by the way, was also, if the Book of Mormon geography information is correct, is the same valley that was the site of Newark, Ohio, and the great Octagon and the great Octagon and Circle complex, which was the largest, is today even the largest temple complex on the earth by sheer size. It's 4 square miles in extent.
Yeah, and it's very possible that Christ returned when he visited there when he visited the Nephites.
Yeah, well, it was their largest temple,
possibly the place,
and it's the only temple that has the entire plan of salvation laid out.
Doesn't say that.
in a massive earthwork. It's just, it's astounding.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see a couple of things here. So, verse 39. And if ye seek the riches, which is the will of the Father to give unto you, ye shall be the richest of all people, for ye shall have the riches of eternity. And it must needs be that the riches of the earth are mine to give, but beware of pride, lest ye become as the Nephites of old. So God does not necessarily withhold riches from people, because riches can lead to many great things happening. It takes money to make good things happen as well, in many instances. He says, but the riches of the earth are mine to give, and when he does, then you got to watch out for pride. So be humble, and that's the one thing about humility that I hate about humility, and that is that as soon as you think you have it, you don't. Just kidding. Yeah. So anyway, so there you
have humility. You just need to not think about it. You just need to strive to not boast on yourself and.
Well, always give praise unto God. I mean, God is the maker of all things, and so that's why we don't rely on science. We don't rely on politics. We don't rely on, on our government. We don't rely on other people. We rely on the Lord, and that's what we're gonna. I want to give you 2 quick examples here from church history in this period of time that I think you really enjoy here. Let's see the last couple things in section 39 here. I wanted to just mention about here is the definition of his gospel in verse 6, and this is my gospel: repentance, baptism by water, and then cometh the baptism of fire and the Holy Ghost. The baptism of fire and the Holy Ghost is not necessarily the gift of the Holy Ghost. That is when you receive the blessing of having the companionship of the Holy Ghost. But the Comforter is right. He's talking about here, I believe, is the second Comforter. And so that's what he is talking about. And the second Comforter will teach you the peaceable things of the kingdom. And I think it's a good idea to ponder a little bit about what is a peaceable thing. What are the peaceable things of the kingdom? But we don't have time to go into that right now. Then lastly here, before we go into the couple of accounts from church history about Lucy Mack Smith, is in verse 9 it says, nevertheless, and he's talking to James Colville here, it says, nevertheless, thou hast seen great sorrow, for thou hast rejected me many times because of what? Pride and the cares of the world. So behold, the days of thy deliverance are come, if thou wilt be baptized. It says in verse 11, he says, that I have prepared for thee a greater work. And that's one thing I have found in my life, is that as the Lord has brought me to a certain point, and then usually there's some kind of a crisis or a problem or an issue or some challenge that you've got going on in your life, if you will be faithful through that challenge, through that process, the Lord always has something even better on the other side. And so some of you may have seen the presentation I did. It's called my miserable, horrible life full of challenges, or why bad things happen to good people. Okay, and I show case after case after case. It's probably one of the best anti-suicide things you can have, is to have examples of something that seems so immense and so horrific that you just can't continue on. And then realize if you do continue on, God has something better for you on the other side. God has something for you to be able to accomplish, and He will do that. And so there's a greater work. So when you go through the trials, just be excited, because when you get through the trials, there's going to be a greater work. So Dason, if you had any trials leading up towards your upcoming mission.
Well, trials, stress, frankly, because it's stressful thinking about going out and preaching the gospel preaching the gospel to the world, and being away from my family for 2 years. But thanks to technology, I'll be able to at least talk to them once a week. So that's the thing.
Yeah, that's something we didn't. I got to. In fact, I got to tell you just one little quick thing. So over in Italy, when I was on my mission in Italy, we weren't allowed to have, except for Mother's Day and Christmas. That's the 2 times you could talk to your family. But they had these little coins called a gettone, and if you put the gettone into a payphone there in Italy, it would actually call whatever number you dialed. And sometimes we could get just, I know, bad missionary here, but pop that gettone in, dial up my America code and my house phone number code, and every now and again, if my mom answered the phone, she could say hello right before it clicked off, and I'd hear my mom's voice. And I just love to hear my mom's voice just saying hello. And then they didn't have caller ID, so she had no idea who was doing it. But just hearing my mom's voice and how important mothers are, and that's what I wanted to bring into the very last of this. I'm going to put the scriptures away for just a second and go into the great mother that Joseph Smith had. I know there's been people, and there's been historians even in the church, who basically have used false precepts about the Smith family, and about that they were indolent and lazy and not adulterous, but that too. Anyway, but they were basically not really your good, solid citizens, not really the kind of people you'd want to emulate. Let me just share with you a couple of experiences here. So this is actually from my set of the church history, and this is volume 3, and it's on page 16. If you just happen to have an old set sitting around, sometimes you can find these like at Desert Industries. I like the old histories because it has a tendency to tell the story from the church's viewpoint. When you get into and I hate to say this, but basically saints, they try to put a lot of other things, and a lot of the miracles that happen in early church history are kind of downplayed, and so you don't see as much of that. But let me just share with you. So the Colesville Saints. Now we all know about the Colesville Saints. I'm not going to go into all that, but basically they were trying to get to Kirtland after Joseph Smith had the revelation about going to the Ohio. They were all leaving the areas, and there's a wonderful map here in the lesson that actually shows you. I can find that real quickly here. Right here. This is the map you can see that map, and it shows the Colesville Saints coming all the way over from the eastern part over here, and then they come up into Fayette. Then they take the Erie Canal over to Lake Erie. Now, right here at Buffalo, New York, this is where this kind of all took place, and that what I'm going to be telling you about is in this area of Buffalo. Now, Joseph and Emma left earlier, and they came this way by wagon, but the Colesville Saints here and the Fayette branch, they all came this way, and then the fastest way to get around back in those days was by ship or by water, much faster than by wagon. And so they would go to Buffalo, New York here, and then they would go from there. Let's see if I can point it there. There we go. Oh, I see. Which one am I pointing at? Okay. They go from Buffalo and take ships all the way down here to here, what's called Fairport Harbor. Now, I've been to, I've taken tours and so forth to Fairport Harbor. It's a really kind of a neat place. A lot of the people who were coming west would take these ships and go along there to Fairport Harbor. This last little part here is this is what's going on up in Buffalo, New York. So the Colesville Saints, when they arrive in Buffalo, it's now in January, and it's freezing cold, and everything is frozen. In fact, the Erie Canal system broke. The canal system broke. They were having to repair it and do some things. I love a couple of pictures here. This just shows in Ithaca. It's on the south end of the Cayuga Lake. There's right here on this side here. The inlet, the lake is about 38 miles in length, was used as a primary means of transportation. And then they would get on the Erie Canal. This is an example of the Erie Canal over here. Okay. And then there's this experience where they arrive at Colesville, and because it's so cold, it's so bitter cold there in January, and the winds coming off of Lake Erie have frozen the lake, and they were delayed for almost 2 weeks. And this is just showing them kind of sitting around waiting for things to happen there in Buffalo, New York. And then it has this interesting story, and I want to share with this. And this is actually from Lucy Mack Smith. This is the history of Joseph Smith by his mother, Lucy Mack Smith. And this is there's a couple of portions here I wanted to share with you. This is a little bit about mothers, and this is the kind of person that raised the prophet Joseph Smith, the leader of this dispensation. So just listen to this lady's words here. It says, on getting about halfway to Buffalo, the canal broke. This gave rise to much murmuring and discontentment, which was expressed in terms like the following, quote, well, the canal is broke now, and here we are likely to be, for we can go no further. We have left our homes, and here we have no means of getting a living. Consequently, we shall have to starve. No, said I, you will not starve, brethren, nor anything of that sort, only to be patient and stop your murmuring. I have no doubt but the hand of the Lord is over us for good. Perhaps it is best for us to be here a short time. It is quite probable that the boats cannot leave Buffalo Harbor on account of the ice. If so, the town must inevitably be crowded with families, in which case it would be next to impossible for us to get into a comfortable house. Are we not in far better circumstances in our present situation? Okay. Well, returned the sisters. I suppose you know best, but it does seem as if it would have been better for us to have stayed where we were, for there we could sit in our rocking chairs and take as much comfort as we pleased, and here we are tired out and have no place to rest ourselves. It says, while this was passing, a citizen of the place came on board, and after inquiring what denomination we belonged to, he requested that if there was any preachers on board, a meeting would be appointed to the neighborhood. I introduced him to Elders Humphrey and Page, I think that's probably Hiram Page, who appointed a meeting for the next day, which was held on a beautiful green bordering the canal. And then the canal was repaired about 11 o'clock, and then they went on and arrived at Buffalo on the 5th day after leaving Waterloo. Here we found the brethren from Colesville, who informed us that they had been detained a week at this place waiting for the navigation to open because of the ice. Also that Mr. Smith and Hiram had gone through to Kirtland by land in order to be there by the 1st of April. I asked them if they had confessed to the people that they were Mormons. No, indeed, they replied. Neither must you mention a word about your religion, for if you do, you will never be able to get a house or a boat either. I told them that I would tell the people precisely who I was, and continued I, if you are ashamed of Christ, you must not expect to be prospered, and I shall wonder if we do not get to Kirtland before you. While we were talking with the Colesville brethren, another boat landed, having on board about 30 brethren, among those who were Thomas B. Marsh, who we know was an apostate or became one, who immediately joined us, and like the Colesville brethren, he was decidedly opposed to our attending to prayer or making known that we were professors of religion, that they were professing their religion. He said that if our company persisted in singing and praying, as we had hitherto done, we should be mobbed before the next morning. Mob it is, then, said I. We shall attend to prayer before sunset, mob or no mob. Mr. Marsh, at this, left considerably irritated. Okay. This is the kind of woman she was, right? And then it says, so that the ice continued on. In her, you gotta get the history. I mean, her history is just phenomenal. But she goes on to they check at several different places. They can't find a place to rent. That some of the women and children are sick. She goes into this older lady's place. She's a cheerful old lady, nearly 70 years of age. I mentioned the circumstances to her as I had done to the landlord. Well, I don't know, she said. Where are you going? To Kirtland, I replied. What be you? She said. Be ye Baptists? I told her that we were Mormons. Mormons, she said in a quick, good-natured tone. What be they? I never heard of them before. I told you that we were Mormons, I replied, because that is what the world call us. But the only name we acknowledge is Latter-day Saints. Latter-day Saints, rejoined she. I never heard of them either. I then informed her that this church was brought forth through the instrumentality of a prophet, and that I was the mother of this prophet. God bless her.
God bless her.
What said she? A prophet in these days? I never heard of the like in my life. And if you will come and sit with me, you shall have a room for your sisters and their children. But you yourself must come and stay with me and tell me all about it. You think she did? Absolutely, she did. She told her all about the whole restoration of the gospel and so forth. And this lady was so just impressed and gave them the rooms that they desperately needed, and it was awesome. So then. And this is for the final part of the podcast. It says, I went to that part of the boat. So it turned out that a couple of boats actually were able to get into the harbor, but then it froze over again. And it says, I went to that part of the boat. They actually, she had so much faith. She said that they took their belongings, and she said, we're going to get on this boat and we're going to go tomorrow. They said, well, not really looking like it, but anyway, so they do that. She said, I went to that part of the boat where the principal portion of the company were. There I found several of the brethren and sisters engaged in a warm debate, others murmuring and grumbling, and the number of young ladies were flirting and giggling and laughing with gentlemen passengers who were entire strangers to them, while hundreds of people on shore on other boats were witnessing the scene of clamor and vanity among the brethren with great interest. I stepped into their midst and said this, Brethren and sisters, said I, we call ourselves saints and profess to have come out of the world for the purpose of serving God at the expense of all other earthly things. And will you, at the very onset, subject the cause of Christ to ridicule by your unwise and improper conduct? You profess to put your trust in God, then how can you fail to murmur and complain as you do? You are even more unreasonable than the children of Israel were, for here are my sisters pining for their rocking chairs, and brethren from whom I expected firmness and energy, declaring that they positively believe that they shall starve to death before they get to the end of their journey. And why is it so? Have any of you lacked? Have not I set food before you every day, and made you who have not provided for yourselves as welcome as my own children? Where is your faith? Where is your confidence in God? Can you not realize that all things were made by him and that he rules over the works of his own hands? I suppose that all the saints here should lift their hearts in prayer to God, that the way might be opened before us, how easy it would be for him to cause the ice to break away, so that in a moment we would be on our journey. Then a man on the shore cried, Is the Book of Mormon true? That book, I replied, was brought forth by the power of God and translated by the gift of the Holy Ghost. And if I could make my voice sound as loud as the trumpet of Michael, the archangel, I would declare the truth from land to land and sea to sea, and the echo should reach to every isle until every member of the family of Adam should be left without any excuse. For I do testify that God has revealed himself to man again in these days, and set his hand to gather his people upon a goodly land. And if they obey the commandments, it shall be unto them for their inheritance. Whereas if they rebel against this law, his hand will be against them to scatter them abroad and cut them off from the face of the earth. And that he has commenced a work which will prove a savior of life unto life, or death unto death, to everyone that stands here this day, of life unto life, if you receive it, or death unto death, if you reject the counsel of God. For every man shall have the desires of his heart, and he desires the truth, and he may hear and live, but if he tramples upon the simplicity of the word of God, he will shut the gate of heaven against himself. Then, turning to our own company, I said, and I love this little quote right here, now, brethren and sisters, if you will all of you raise your desires to heaven, that the ice may be broken up, and we be set at liberty, as sure as the Lord lives, it will be done. At that instant a noise was heard, like a bursting of thunder. The captain cried, every man to his post. The ice parted, leaving barely a passage for the boat, so narrow that as the boat passed through, the buckets of the water wheel were torn off with a crash, which, joined to the word of command from the captain, the hoarse answering to the sailors, the noise of the ice, and the cries and confusion of the spectators, presented a scene truly terrible. We had barely passed through the avenue when the ice closed together again, and the Colesville brethren were left in Buffalo, unable to follow us. They didn't have the faith that Joseph Smith's mom had. As we were leaving the harbor, one of the bystanders exclaimed, there goes the Mormon company. That boat is sunk in the water 9 inches deeper than it ever was before, and mark it, she will sink. There is nothing sure. In fact, they were so sure of it that they went straight to the office and had it published that we were sunk, so that when we arrived at Fairport, we read in the papers the news of our own death. After our miraculous escape from the wharf at Buffalo, we called our company together and had a prayer meeting in which we offered up our thanks to God for his mercy, which he had manifested towards us in our deliverance. For before our meeting was broken up, the captain's mate came to me and said, Mrs. Smith, do for God's sake have the children stop praying, for we shall all go to hell together. We cannot keep one single man to his post if we should go to the devil, for they are so taken up with your praying. Therefore, our meeting was broken up. So if you hear church historians or anybody downplaying the significance of the Smith family and their and especially you look at these are the words of Joseph Smith's mother. These are not the words of a lady who was involved in folk magic, as some have proposed, and these are not the words of a lady who had no faith. These are the words of a lady who had faith to actually work miracles. And she testified of her son, Joseph Smith, and his divine calling. And so I hope that these have been inspiring or inspirational to you, as it has been to me in my whole life as I read these stories from the church history. I just absolutely love it. In fact, there's the picture of the 20 feet of ice they talked about is here. It says, when Mother Smith's company arrived in Buffalo, they found the Colesville Saints waiting for an opening in the ice floe at the direction of Lucy Mack Smith. A Captain Blake was located in passage arranged for the Fayette Company. The very next day, they boarded the boat and waited and hoped for the ice to break. A man was sent out from the boat to measure the thickness of the ice, which he reported to be piled up to a depth of 20 feet. Lucy called for the saints to pray. Her request was attended with marvelous results. Brothers and sisters, the gospel is true. Joseph Smith is a prophet of God, and this is his mother, and she was a faithful saint. So I hope that you've enjoyed this. Next week's podcast will be coming up shortly. We got a little bit behind on this one. Dason, I want to thank you so much for joining me and sharing some of your things. I got one last thing that you need to do in the back. What is behind you there?
Oh, it's a Channel Liberty I had made.
Yeah.
But the top two characters up there,
yeah,
they're backwards. It's not that bad of a mistake, but it's all right.
For all of you who know Hebrew, there you go. Okay. All right. Dason, thank you again for that and appreciate that. And folks, we will see you next week. If you have a chance, we now have just a few more of the presentations for the big conference, the expo, that are being put up now. Most of it's there. I think we're up to about 50-something presentations. If you have not subscribed to the streaming site, I hope that you would take advantage and do so. I think you will enjoy it. And for now, it's Rod Meldrum signing off.
There's great news for all of you annual subscribers to the Book of Mormon Evidence streaming site. You receive $15 discount on our virtual conference, and everyone that registers gets a free Hebrew in the Heartland 2-hour bonus presentation by Rod Meldrum. Watch online anytime, anywhere, on any electronic device. And thank you to all of you for listening and watching so we can keep creating new exciting content that uplifts, educates, and inspires. Don't miss the 27th International Book of Mormon Evidence Conference. Virtual tickets on sale at bookofmormonevidencestreaming.com. Viewing begins April 9th.
Hi, I'm Rod Meldrum, and I want to welcome you to the 27th International Book of Mormon Evidence Conference, and it's also part of the Firm Foundation Expo. Folks, if you have been watching this research and seen this unfold over the last number of years, last year, as you know, in April, we had to go virtual. Virtual actually has turned out to be a pretty good way to do a conference because it allows you to have full access to everything. In the previous conferences, we've had 5 or 6 speakers at the same time, and if you didn't go to the one that you wanted, or if you couldn't get into the one that you wanted, then you weren't able to see that. We've eliminated that. We can see every single speaker, stop and take care of other things if you want to, and resume again when you want to, all in the streaming video site. So I want to encourage you to come and join us for our 3rd virtual expo. This is going to be in the 27th International Book of Mormon Evidence Conference. We have some amazing speakers coming up for you, incredible new research. I know Wayne May and many others have gotten a lot of new things that they're going to be sharing with you. So if you'd like to join us, and also you'll have access to most of all our previous conferences and all the talks and the presentations that have been done there. It is the largest repository of information and research on the Book of Mormon that's ever been assembled. So please join us, come and check out the expo, and I think you're going to really enjoy it.
Don't miss the 27th International Book of Mormon Evidence Conference. Viewing begins April 9th. Yearly subscribers get a $15 discount at bookofmormonevidencestreaming.com.